I am such an awesome guy. I make so many videos.
Hello there, Price of Reason here with a movie review. Those of you that have been following my channel for a while probably know that I've always had mixed feelings about director Zack Snyder, as in my opinion, he's a man of many contradictions. On the one hand, within his movies, Snyder is sometimes capable of delivering some interesting creative ideas along with some stylish visuals. On the other hand, he's also capable of delivering poorly presented and poorly conceived cringe. His storytelling can sometimes include some compelling story moments, but it can also suddenly generate some very embarrassing, head-scratching moments as well. Martha! Some of Snyder's casting choices to date have been absolutely brilliant, while others have been major flops. With all of that being said, when Snyder's latest movie, Rebel Moon, was announced in 2021, I did find myself wanting it to be good. That's because I knew that this movie was initially pitched as a Star Wars project to Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy and Disney, who had rejected it. As a result, Snyder modified Rebel Moon just enough to legally exist outside the Star Wars franchise as a non-related standalone movie, which was eventually picked up by Netflix and then split up into two movies. Given how poorly Disney and Kennedy have handled the Star Wars IP over the past several years, effectively running it into the ground, I had initially liked this idea of Disney having some type of competition here. And in spite of my mixed feelings towards Snyder, I had genuinely hoped that perhaps Rebel Moon would be the movie where Snyder would finally step up his game and deliver a movie with consistent quality. A movie that would further highlight Disney's failure with Star Wars, while perhaps also even indirectly highlighting some of Warner Brothers' disrespect of DC fans over the year. And with a rumored budget of $250 million to film Rebel Moon and full creative control, this was Snyder's big moment, an unprecedented opportunity to show the world that he's not just a widely mentioned director, but also a legitimately good one. Now, since I don't want to give away any real spoilers in this review, I'm only going to be discussing the plot of the movie in very broad strokes, not that there's all that much to spoil here, and after that, as always, I will talk about what I didn't like about this movie, what I did like about this movie, followed by my official score. The movie starts off on a planet where some farmers are being threatened by a group of Imperium Soldiers, not to be confused with Star Wars' Imperial Soldiers, until one day a mysterious lady leads an alliance of rebels to join forces and fight back. One of the most obvious things about Rebel Moon is that it desperately wants to be a brand new Star Wars movie, but unfortunately, more than anything else, it acts as a more watered-down rehash of A New Hope, sprinkled with ideas from The Phantom Menace and The Empire Strikes Back. And I say watered down because I honestly don't think that Snyder brings anything new to the table here. Story-wise, one of Disney's biggest problems with their handling of Star Wars is how they keep rehashing the past without actually introducing anything that feels fresh and new. How they also introduce too many characters for whatever reasons, without actually giving them enough story or character development. And in that sense, Snyder doesn't fare much better than Disney. There are absolutely too many characters in Rebel Moon, introduced in a way that feels too clinical, and we never really feel a deep connection with any of them as a result. The second act of this movie is way too long, and by the time the third act arrives, the story concludes in a rather predictable and anticlimactic way. And the movie's over-reliance on green screens doesn't really help either, especially in parts that the CGI doesn't look so great, and don't even get me started about Snyder's typical overindulgent use of slow motion. And if you were hoping that as opposed to Disney, perhaps Snyder's version of a 2023 Star Wars movie would focus less on modern-day trendy Hollywood agendas, well, you'll probably be disappointed with that as well. Part of my biggest criticism of Disney Star Wars is how anti-male it has become since they've purchased it. How few genuinely positive male heroes we see in Disney Star Wars, and how its writers go out of their way to negatively present men, especially of a certain background. But rather than providing a real alternative approach to that in Rebel Moon, Snyder ultimately just pushes the exact same agenda that Disney does. Perhaps in a way that feels a bit less mean-spirited, but for me, the bottom line still feels the same. Not that his agenda even helped Snyder get any high scores from mainstream critics, if that's what he was going for. They still don't seem to like him very much. The women in this movie are a bit too girl-bossy, whereas the men, especially of a certain background, are either cowards, sneaky, irresponsible, miserable, or evil. And while the more diverse male characters in Rebel Moon are usually presented more positively than the non-diverse male characters, even they are still overshadowed by the girl bosses. And the main protagonist of this movie, Kora, much like Disney's Rey Palpatine, is a hybrid of a girl boss and a girl that's the key to everything, as Gary would say, all in one character. And you know what? I'm really tired of all of this lazy and political character work, so I'm going to be laying down some business facts here. Customer-wise, Star Wars is and always has been a more male-centric franchise. It doesn't mean that women have never liked it, but the key demographic that had kept this multi-billion-dollar franchise alive with its wallets from 1977 to 2012 was male. And with all due respect, even in 2023, more women are likely to tune into procedural dramas, character dramas, or female-driven unscripted programming than the science fiction adventure genre. And from my experience, most women who actually do like science fiction, such as Star Wars or a Rebel Moon, they also want to see more positive male heroes in their movies and shows. Now, I'm not saying that you can't have female hero characters working alongside male hero characters in a good sci-fi movie. I would say that the Lucas-era Star Wars movies actually did accomplish that, but when the feeling is that a movie is overpropping its female and even gender-neutral characters while purposely diminishing the male ones, especially of a certain background, it starts to annoy me as it gives a smash the white patriarchy vibe, which I don't prefer. Especially not in a movie that's supposed to be escapist. Now, I know some people will ask me, what about the character of Gunnar played by Michiel Huisman, who is a co-star of sorts in this movie? Isn't he a positive male hero? And my answer to that is, no, he isn't. In this movie, he's mostly a timid, foolish damsel in distress that has the same character arc as the lion in The Wizard of Oz. Yes, at one point in the movie, he seemingly does one positive thing, possibly to deflect the exact type of criticism that I'm voicing right now, but these type of cheap storytelling tricks simply don't work on me, and I stand by my assessment of the character. Now, while you've just heard some harsh criticism about Rebel Moon, I do also have some good things to say about it. As much as I think that the writing in the second and third act of the movie isn't good enough, I think that the first act of the movie is actually pretty good. In fact, in my opinion, the first act could have been a good foundation for a much better movie than we ended up getting, especially had the storytelling been more original, creative, and ambitious overall. I also think that the cast of this movie is mostly competent and likable. Actors like Djimon Hounsou, Charlie Hunnam, Stas Nair, and Ray Fisher certainly do their best here, but unfortunately, they just aren't given much to do. Sofia Boutella, who plays Kora, is probably a better actress than Disney Star Wars actress Daisy Ridley, and in addition, she seems more athletic in her fight scenes. I mean, don't get me wrong, Boutella still seems to beat up much bigger and stronger male opponents in a way that looks overly choreographed in parts, but she doesn't outright annoy me. And even though Kora's backstory fits in a bit too conveniently with the movie's overall story, if nothing else, it at least makes some logical sense. If I had to point out an actor that was a standout in this movie, I would say that it's Skrein, who plays a villainous Imperial officer. In his performance, in my opinion, Skrein is so much more menacing than Adam Driver ever was as Kylo Ren in the entire Disney Star Wars sequel trilogy, and along with some decent dialogue writing for Skrein's character, that's the one thing that this movie actually does get right. As far as the visuals go, amidst the movie's overuse of green screens and CGI, there are some VFX in it that do look pretty cool, like the robot we're introduced to on the farmer's planet, or an occasional spaceship. And perhaps that's what I find especially frustrating about this movie, and actually about Snyder himself. This was such a missed opportunity for him to make a truly great sci-fi space adventure for fans of this genre, but as usual, Snyder ended up getting in his own way. Again. And I believe this keeps happening to Zack Snyder because he suffers from something that I like to call Snyderia, which means that the only person that Snyder seems to listen to at all is pretty much himself. For example, if Snyder has a creative idea, well, then I can only assume that it automatically becomes the greatest idea ever. And once again for Rebel Moon, Snyder didn't hire experienced writing partners with enough of a sci-fi resume to help elevate his story ideas. Instead, Snyder just hired a long-time yes-man collaborator with a rather quiet track record. But that always seems to be the case with him. Snyder either surrounds himself with loyalists who wouldn't dare challenge him creatively, or if they happen to challenge him, he most likely just doesn't listen to them. And as long as Snyder continues to suffer from Snyderia, regardless of his potential as a filmmaker, his movies, in my opinion, will always suffer. And the only real consolation that Snyder can take from Rebel Moon is that, in spite of all of his missteps, it is still in fact a better movie than Disney's entire Star Wars sequel trilogy. As opposed to, let's say, writer-director hacks like J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson, I don't consider Zack Snyder to be a creative con man. Just a somewhat talented director with an overinflated ego that thinks he's some type of fancy auteur. In reality though, he's no Martin Scorsese, he's no Tarantino, and he's no Christopher Nolan either. Which means that in order for Snyder to reach his full potential as a filmmaker, his productions actually do need to be more collaborative efforts and with more enthusiastic team creativity. At least that's the way I see it. Now, I have to admit that this movie was especially difficult for me to score. On the one hand, there were things I didn't like about it, but on the other hand, it had moments where I still felt it had some merit and even a bit of heart. In my scoring system, anything above 60 is considered a passing grade, so I'm rather hesitantly giving this movie a 65 out of 100. It's not a complete failure in my opinion, but it isn't anywhere near as good as it could and should have been. I genuinely hope that its sequel, scheduled for a 2024 release, will be better than this one, but at the same time, I also wouldn't exactly bet on it. What did you think about Rebel Moon? Did you love it? Feel free to let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channels and also clicking on that wonderful notification bell. Thanks for watching, my friends. Thank you, and good day.
I am such an awesome guy. I make so many videos.